to beating a dead horse in quarantine. I'm your host, not touching anyone, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, washing my hands every 3 seconds. Oh God, I'm washing my hands right now. Somebody stop me, Jackson Keller.
And the world is shut down. We have nowhere to go, nowhere to be, no one to see. And so we can't go to theaters. Which means that we have to find other movies to watch, and we can't just glom on to what's new and hot.
We can't be hip. We can't be happening. So we've got to dig into some quarantine classics. If you have a backlog, now's the time to cross some names off that list. And that's what we're doing.
So for the next coming weeks, if you haven't listened to our Hunt episode, here's what's going to happen. We are going to be digging into all the stuff that we have on our backlog. We have a pretty much restriction on like 1975 is the latest we're going. We're trying to hit those classics. It's as Jackson said, quarantine classics. So that's what we're doing. Next week is Citizen Kane. This week is Casablanca. It's the big two that somehow neither of us had seen.
Neither of us had seen it. The GOATs, highly regarded as two of the greatest films of all time. And well, Sean, how do we feel about that with regards to Casablanca? How did we feel about that?
Casablanca, honestly, I really, really liked. It was a really well-made, well-written, well-designed film. I loved pretty much every minute I spent with it. This is so formal, and I feel very weird about this because this is not our usual format. It's something about how I am talking about this makes me feel like I'm hyping up some sort of fucking bullshit paid shill thing. There we go. I just need to swear a little bit. Honestly, I think that's what it needed to be. I just need to just get a good fuck in.
We needed to drop our register a bit.
Yeah, we're being too highbrow, too pretentious for this shit. No, I really like Casablanca. It was a movie that I finished watching, I will say, and kind of sat back and said, I really like that, but I don't fully understand why it's so highly regarded, like why it is one of the big two, so to speak. Doing some further research, I completely understand now. I think it's a fascinating film unto its own right. The historical context surrounding it really elevates it, and I understand why it's so well regarded. Like, as I said, the movie by itself, it stands up wonderfully. It's enjoyable to watch. It doesn't fall into any of the trappings that you might expect from older movies vis-a-vis slurs, which is good. Like, if I'm really invested in an older movie and then somebody drops some heavy slurs, it usually takes it right out of me, and I'm like, oh, you had to do that. And this movie doesn't do that. It actually treats all of its characters fairly well. Sam, the one black character in it, is definitely treated subserviently, but still well enough for the time period.
I mean, they share drinks with him. They talk to him like a friend from like a World War II movie. That's, as much as you hate to say it, that's kind of the best you can hope for, really.
Yeah, so I mean, props in that regard. Yeah, that's what I gotta say. Jackson, what's your take on Casablanca?
I also greatly enjoyed it. I'm not coming here with the contrarian tank of like, oh, this actually sucks. Like, everyone is wrong. Like, I'm not here to do that. I also did a little bit of thinking of why this is held up as one of the greats. And I think a lot of it has to do with, there is a lot of interesting historical context and resonance that keeps it at least timely, if not timeless. Arguably timeless, but definitely timely. And beyond that, I think that it's easy for me to see, like, with the kind of movie that this is, why it continues to be so well regarded by both like critics and just like general audiences, why so many of its lines of dialogue have become iconic. And, to that end, it basically is, I do kind of keep saying that this is my favorite kind of movie, and that it's a crowd pleaser with a little bit of brain cells, with a little bit of a heart. You got some really like fun characters and performances. You got, a little dash of that sort of adventuresome setting with like an interesting, unique location, both like in the micro of like Rick's bar and in the like macro of like Casablanca in this weird like middle ground between like occupied France and, you know, unoccupied France. So, you know, dash in like an interesting setting, like, you know, some great witty writing, some resonant themes. You kind of mix it all together, and it's easy to see why it would remain such a crowd pleaser. And in addition to just like being a crowd pleaser, I think that the really good ones do tend to hold up. But I also think that in terms of like criticism, if you like, in terms of looking at it from that more like highbrow angle, there's more going on with its themes than in something like, oh, I don't want to like shit on another well-known classic movie. But like let's say North by Northwest, for example. I love North by Northwest, but that is not a movie with quite the same like humanitarian angle. That's mostly just a really, really well executed spy thriller, like Proto-Bomb. That's an important movie in its own right. But this is it's got that same crowd pleaser element, like, you know, handsome actors and dames and, you know, having flirty dialogue and the romance and the thrills and the adventure and all that. But with its story about, really unsubtly actually, about, you know, neutrality and like picking a side and like, you know, kind of rising to a higher cause. I say it's not subtle, which is true, but I don't mean that as like a mark against the movie. I mean that in that the movie's thesis is clear, its themes are really coherent and cogent and relevant, and it all comes together in a great way, and that still makes it a marvel to watch. So if you have not seen Casablanca, I do think that if you go in expecting it to be the greatest movie of all time, like blow your mind, I think that's the wrong way to approach these kinds of movies. I think that if you come in saying like, well, what's all the fuss about, and that's your main concern, you might be setting yourself up to be disappointed. Maybe not, but but if you come in just like thinking of this as like, okay, this is a movie that's really, really good, I think you're going to get a lot out of it, as long as you're not expecting it to like suddenly to, you know, sacrifice a goat before it because it's your new movie god or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of kind of putting our thoughts together, is just like, there's a reason Casablanca has endured for so long, but I mean, it still has aged in a lot of ways. And
if you'll allow me, just from the little bit of reading that I've done about it, is that even like for its time, this isn't like a Citizen Kane situation where, like, even without having seen Citizen Kane, like, you can kind of say that movie introduced a lot of new, like, techniques to cinema, right? Like, this movie isn't particularly famous for doing that, even back in its day. This movie's just known for being really, really good and fun, just really high quality. And I think that's the difference, but like between saying that, like, you know, it has, I agree. I don't think aged is the right way to put it.
Especially because in a lot of ways, this movie feels incredibly modern in just terms of like a filmmaker's sensibility. It is very quick. It is very well written. Like, the dialogue is all very sharp and snarky in a lot of ways. Like, it doesn't have the Marvel edge to it, but like, it kind of has like it could feel that way in a lot of ways, you know? Like, there's a similarity to be made just in how quick and snappy everything is in it. It doesn't have any sort of pretensions about itself. It's very much like expected to be a blockbuster in a lot of ways, and feels like today's blockbusters would as well. There's not some like long poignant scenes of someone staring wistfully out a window wondering where their life went wrong. It's just like, hey, here's some dialogue between two attractive people, enjoy.
I think that actually, I think you're hitting on something interesting, because I think that tends to be when you think of like the great movies, what's considered like, you know, the great movies in cinema history, like depending on what time period you're looking at, like I think you're more or less likely to find something kind of weird and experimental and maybe harder to get behind, while others, like a lot of the great movies, are just that. Like, there was a lot of stuff being done in like the popular spaces. And I'd say that like 40s and 50s, like 40s, 50s, 60s, like this was, you know, the old Hollywood era, basically. Like that's when the focus was, you know, just kind of making stuff as like high quality, kind of star driven as possible. This is when like David O. Selznick was like the biggest force in the movie industry, like bigger than any of his individual directors, like kind of producer driven. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it is like a marked difference from something like the 70s, like new Hollywood movies or even like the 20s, like Cabinet of like Dr. Caligari and, you know, kind of the silent era when people were doing weird shit and the Hays Code hadn't come in to unify things in a lot of ways. So I think like keeping the history in mind definitely helps. And this is definitely, this movie's a crowd pleaser. And I think it still is good at doing that.
I honestly think the best thing I could describe it as is very proto-Indiana Jones.
Yeah, this would have been one of the movies that Indiana Jones took a lot of inspiration from, for sure.
Which I say that more as if you are on the fence, it's kind of just Indiana Jones in a lot of ways, just without the running through a temple with a ball chasing them, unless that ball is Nazis. But Indiana Jones has Nazis too, so I guess that metaphor kind of sticks and doesn't stick at the same time, huh?
Yeah, I mean it's almost like it's kind of proto Indiana Jones, like proto Bond. Like it's got a bit of that noir kind of edge without being full like film noir. I think that if you're a fan of, you know, just spy movies, those kind of adventure movies, even if this movie doesn't quite have all the elements that you'd expect from the modern incarnations of those genres, I think that it's still really interesting to see kind of where that stuff comes from and how, like, even if this didn't create a lot of those tropes, this is maybe the most iconic version of a lot of those tropes. Yeah, and it's definitely any budding filmmaker, film critic deserves to watch it, and I'm quite happy to have filled this gap in my knowledge.
Even though we've been doing this for 2.5, 3 years at this point.
I mean, who else is going to talk about Justice League week to week? Like, surely that was a more valuable use of our time.
I mean, is there anything we particularly want to talk about spoilers? I mean, we could talk a little bit about the historical context before actually diving into the meat and potatoes of the film, because I think that is something that is worth mentioning, just because I didn't know the historical context before we watched this, and I had to do a little bit of reading afterwards, and I think it added a lot to it, but it's an interesting historical context in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree. I think we should start there, because it helps you to appreciate the movie more when you understand sort of what's going on in terms of the like world politics, in terms of like Hollywood's politics. So yeah, let's do that.
So I'm gonna run this one at least in the beginning. I'm gonna probably tee this up for Jackson a little bit more here, because if you're a longtime listener of the show, I am a history dummy. I don't know dates for shit. I don't know, like I can broad strokes history fairly decently, but like if you're like, hey, what year did World War II take place? I would look at you slack-jawed like an idiot. Which is important to note because Casablanca came out in 1942. My brain assumed that was post-World War II. It is not. It is, in fact, pretty much right in the middle of World War II, about the time that the U.S. said, all right, we need to have a little chat with Nazi Germany and got involved. That really sounded like I was glorifying war. Please don't go to war, and don't think that I believe in American exceptionalism. I just want to put that out there right now. It's important to note that this movie took place during World War II, and it also is important to note that this movie was basically made pre-America's involvement in World War II, which is an important element to know because the movie, even with my dumb brain, I picked up that the Rick's Bar was basically a meeting ground for all the forces of the war and kind of a microcosm of the outside world that was going on. I had assumed that this was going to be kind of a retrospective of everything that was going on, given that I thought that this movie came out after World War II. But knowing that it came out during World War II, it really shifts the idea from this is how the war played out to, hey, we need to do something about this war, guys. Huh? Right? Like, yeah.
This is a pretty common element in a lot of early 40s Hollywood movies. This like subtly or not so subtly like nudging for America to get involved, or on the other hand, I'm sure there are plenty of films that were like pro isolationism too. But yeah, it's pretty apparent here. The Great Dictator is another movie that's but kind of a kindred spirit to this one, I'd say. That's more of like an explicit like Nazi comedy, but in terms of like motivating America to get involved, as well as like being a interesting cultural artifact for like how Nazi Germany was portrayed before and after like America actually got involved. I think that it's interesting to look back, because that kind of creates its own weird things from a modern perspective. I can't really talk about that without spoilers though, so we'll have to table that for a bit.
Well, I mean, we can say this much, all right? There are references to concentration camps within the film, and they are played not for laughs, but like it's going to jail, not going to what we now know as a concentration camp.
Yeah, like if this would have been like becoming any other kind of like POW, you know, which is bad. Not the Holocaust.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very recontextualized movie, knowing what we know now, which honestly makes it all the more fascinating in a lot of ways. It was kind of interesting not realizing that this took place during World War II and to be like, wow, they are kind of glib with this concentration camp stuff. But, you know, it was a weird time. The Hays Code was around, which if you're unfamiliar with the Hays Code, as I'm sure a lot of people are, it was a very like authoritarian rules for movie makers at the time. Like the MPAA is nothing compared to what the Hays Code was.
It was like self-censorship to keep the government involved, like studio mandated, and also like very specific in terms of promoting like good hashtag moral American values. Like you're not allowed to, pretty famous example just off the top of my head, you're not allowed to say that somebody is pregnant under the Hays Code. So like in It's a Wonderful Life, when George Bailey finds out that his wife is expecting, he says like, oh my god, you have a bun in the oven. And like they had to use a bunch of euphemisms like that to get around this shit. I'm gonna use my favorite example actually, just because I love this bit of trivia. I believe it was Notorious. It's one of the Hitchcock movies. I think it's Notorious, where there was a limit on how long you could show two people kissing under the Hays Code, and you know, obviously we don't want anyone getting too worked up by how steamy our movies are. But Alfred Hitchcock had a wonderful workaround. And there's a very long scene in Notorious of Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman making out. And what Hitchcock did was that he would have them kiss up until like a second before it was too long. They would stop, have some dialogue for a second, and then go right back to it. And that counted as like circumventing the Hays Code.
Filmmakers were not a huge fan of the Hays Code. It was self-inflicted, but also self-worked around in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, I'm glad that it no longer exists, but it's always interesting to see, because filmmakers are like arty-farty types at their heart, so there's always been that, you know, friction between maybe the executives or the producers, which, you know, obviously the Hays Code existed to impose upon, so that you didn't get too arty-farty and offend the good conservative, you know, American public. You know, speaking as from a modern perspective, now that it's gone, it's really cool, to like read about and see what tricks people did to get around it, and it unintentionally created some positive outcomes, as we will discuss in for this movie.
And if you want to learn more about the Hays Code, you can at your local library, which actually, now that I say that, is probably shut down due to quarantine. Just Google it. Just Google it.
Take a look. It's in Google. A reading rainbow.
All right. Do we want to kind of dig into spoilers here a little bit?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and do that. I think we should.
Well, before we do, as always, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, leave us a review on iTunes, tell a friend, follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/BADHcast. Next week, as we said, we're going to be talking about Citizen Kane because we need to knock out some of these classics that we've never seen. And also, just while I'm thinking about it, we should probably do classic, cult classic, because this has been very serious, and then I assume next week is going to be very serious as well. And it's a very weird vibe for us because all of our modern stuff is very serious as well, but also very goofy. And this has just been here are facts about Casablanca. These are things that you could know. Here's analysis. And we haven't said fuck enough, I think, is the problem. So
hashtag let Sean say fuck.
All right, let's talk about the spoilers of Casablanca.
Like, comment, and subscribe before we do.
Oh, right, yeah. As always, for Jackson, like, comment, and subscribe. And for me,
all right. I think coming back to the concentration camps is actually a good place to start, because that brings us into the central conflict and sort of how we feel about our main hero, which is basically better Geralt. at least better show Geralt.
Which, if you're wondering about that, that's going to be on our bonus episode at our Patreon. We're talking about the Witcher TV show, probably coming out tomorrow from when this episode goes live.
I can never remember what we do for the Patreon, what we're doing. This quarantine has erased all sense of time and structure from my brain.
Welcome to the quarantine, yes.
Anyway, but we have a pretty similar scenario, more it's not just not wanting to choose between the lesser of two evils. Rick is very explicitly I'm not gonna stick out my neck for anyone. I'm gonna run my little bar in Casablanca. I'm on the run from several authorities. And I'm even though I have a war hero pass, an anti-fascist pass, I'm just gonna sit here and run my little bar. Have my friend play his piano, take care of my workers, and that's that. Be very isolated, if you will.
And, just for what it's worth, this is completely unrelated to what Jackson is saying, but, it's 1942, and the character Rick is from America. I don't know why I brought that up right now, related to what Jackson was saying, because it's totally not at all have any sort of symbolism in there, but...
Sean, are you trying to imply that this movie is actually about whether or not America should join the war effort against Nazi Germany?
Jackson, I would never imply anything. I'm just purely stating facts that are unrelated to things that you are talking about.
Amazing. But yeah, movie's subtle as a sledgehammer, but it doesn't need to be any more than that.
It is worth noting, though, for as subtle of a sledgehammer as it is, if you're a history dummy like me, it's not as subtle as a sledgehammer. It took me a little bit longer to figure out what was going on than I'd like to admit.
No, that's fair. I think part of that's just a natural, just naturally being distant from it. I imagine even for people who the equivalent of our apolitical crowd who didn't read the newspaper or whatever, they probably even understood what was going on, but that's just a result of them living in that climate.
For sure. I more so bring that up to be listen, this is the type of thing that you pick up that there's definitely something going on with the bar, but you might not pick up the nuances until you go and find out a little bit more about the movie. So if you are just enjoying the film, don't fret that you missed this, is basically what I'm saying, because someone who does this weekly at minimum, didn't pick up on it.
Yeah, and actually, I think that leads into another point in that I have criticized movies in the past for being too obvious with their metaphors and being annoying. The reasons that I do that, there's usually two distinct reasons why I would criticize those movies and not this. The first is that when the obvious metaphors are obvious metaphors that I think are wrong or like have a standpoint that I disagree with, obviously I'm going to take umbrage with that. I think it's pretty hard to argue that care about things and Nazis are bad. I don't think that's a really disputable viewpoint unless you've been hanging around on 4chan for too long. But I think more importantly to the film's credit is that what annoys me about metaphors is when the metaphor is so obvious that the characters stop being characters and that like they don't have any sort of internal lives that you can't apply to anything else. And I think that what Casablanca does really well is that even though it does have these blatant kind of metaphors, these are character dynamics and archetypes that and like personal struggles that are familiar and relatable to real human beings, like longing for like a love that you once had and like never quite been able to get over, like feeling isolated and alone and not wanting to stick your neck out and being kind of jaded and cynical. Like these are all coherent character traits that add up to the human being of Rick, owner of Rick's Cafe, as opposed to just like Rick stand-in for whatever point the author is trying to make.
This is Rick-shaped America.
Yes, this is the difference between good art and bad art, I dare say. And I think that the movie, through the witty writing, through the actors, it gives the characters enough life on their own, so that you're not constantly just thinking about like, yes, I dare say, like this is about the war, isn't it, Sonny? No, you're laughing along with the dialogue, like you're getting invested in the vibe of the whole thing. You're taking notes of some good sets and some good like staging. You're involved with the movie. You're having a good time with a movie as opposed to like reading a textbook by someone who's not that clever.
And like they don't just every line of dialogue isn't in service of the grander theme. Sometimes it's in service of being a person, which is nice and not grating and enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think we should like also maybe discuss this. So like what as a protagonist, like what makes Rick still compelling to follow, even though he spends a lot of it being very hard to get behind. I feel like we've come across this issue quite a bit. And like so what makes it a better example here?
Oh god, that's honestly kind of a tough question to answer. Like I hadn't even really thought about that up to this point. Like he is pretty much the definition of an anti-hero in that throughout most of the movie you like him, but you're not really rooting for him. And I think that honestly, if you want a very simple, straightforward answer, it's the fact that he's charming and his dialogue is snappy. Like if he was neither of those things, as a character, he would be reprehensible and you would absolutely hate him. But because he's allowed to have those moments of charm and the few moments of humanity and where he, helps out those people so they don't sleep with Renault, the French corrupt inspector, there's moments of humanity that really brings him back to it, which help a lot.
Yeah, I agree, because I was also going to point to, like, even at one of his, like, lowest points, when he, like, lashes out at Ilsa when she first tries to explain, like, what happened in Paris all that time ago when he's, like, getting really drunk. Like, the fact that, like, in the scene preceding that, and he's like thinking about all these memories and is just like on the verge of tears. Like there's a real humanity to him beyond just like gruff asshole, you know?
It's sympathetic. It's set up well so that that scene doesn't feel like him just being a shitlord. It feels like something that someone else might do because they're overwhelmed with emotions. They've been drinking because someone that they thought they would never see again just showed up back into their lives. Like, it's a very human thing to be doing and isn't just, hey, fuck yourself type of thing going on.
Yeah, and I think that all these traits, like they really help sell sort of the central tension at the end, which is like, is Rick going to do the right thing and stick his neck out for Ilsa and her husband, the, resistance leader? And not only that, but like, is Rick going to try and cuck the resistance leader by like running away with her? That's another sort of central tension. So like the whole tension of the last part of the movie is less so like, are Ilsa and her husband going to get away? Because they're not really the main characters. Like, that's part of it. But the central tension is like, is Rick going to be able to redeem himself, basically? But I think that the first part of the movie like does show a person whose redemption is like worth caring about, I think.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that third act for a second that you kind of alluded to there with the two possible endings that we in 2020 see for Rick and what they actually do with it. Because watching this movie, the third act rolls around and I've been like really into it and I've been having a grand old time with it. And then that first chunk of the third act where he seems like he's just really skeevy and shitty to Ilsa, and I'm like, oh god, this is not gonna go well. And there's this kind of threat that he's gonna run away with her. I'm like, that's a shitty ending. That doesn't feel good. I don't want that. That's not a redemption. That this movie feels like it's building up to a redemption, and that feels like something that a movie of this time period or of this style would do, and I don't like that. Or B, they're going to go with option 2, which is gives them up and they go to a concentration camp, which
I want to take a moment to interject about that. Actually, we had touched on this before, but I think that if you watch movies from the 40s, before like people knew the full extent of like what was going on in Nazi Germany, they're very candid about a lot of this terminology, like concentration camps and stuff, in a way that they're not following the war. And understandably so. Like, I'm not here to trash like movies from the 50s for not knowing how to like grapple with the fucking Holocaust. But I think that it gives these movies a little bit of an unintentional like bite, like being so straightforward about it, like from a modern perspective. Like, yes, this is the stakes. If our heroes don't succeed, they're going to fucking concentration camps. So that's another way that I think, like, as time has gone on, in a way that wasn't intended, or at least not intended to this degree, like those stakes, those values sort of like resonate, and like we're really like rooting for the heroes and like really rooting against the fucking Nazis.
Which is why those two options really suck when it seems like that's where the movie is going. And so like there was a good 10-15 minutes there where I'm just like, oh man, I'm gonna hate this movie, aren't I? Like, this is gonna turn out wrong, and I'm just gonna go from really enjoying my time with it and being like, yeah, I like this, I'm having a grand old time watching old movies, hell yeah, to, oh god, no, why did you do this? I'm happy to say that is not what happened, and that like the fact how the movie actually plays out was not something I saw coming at all, which speaks to the movie as a film itself. Like that final act twist is actually really, really good, even up to him and Renault leaving after he shoots the Nazi officer. We're gonna come back to that in a minute because Jackson has something to say about that is well worth saying.
Yeah, it puts a bit of a damper on things and what is otherwise like a very iconic scene, to say the least. But yeah, for now, the funny thing is, from what I understand, from what little that I've gleaned, that even the original play, the stage play that this movie was based on, had a very similar ending of Rick sending Ilsa and her husband away, but some of the producers apparently had flirted with the idea of giving the audience, like, you know, the romantic ending that they want, of like our hero ending up with the heroine. And apparently there was like a strongly worded letter from one of the producers, not that strongly worded, I guess, but I guess in producer speak it probably was, that was saying like, look, like, we have a unique twist going on here, like, you know, that it doesn't feel right for the characters, and furthermore, the Hays Code literally won't let this woman run off with someone who's not her husband, so get this shitty idea out of your mind. So it sounds like all the creative forces were against having Rick end up with Ilsa, which was the right creative move, having him, you know, this is the start of a beautiful friendship. Great line as they like walk off into the smoke, and kind of I also really like another great but unsubtle shot of when the police officer is like drinking from the Viking bottle, and he looks at it, he's like, fuck this, and throws it in the bin. That was fun. And so like the thing about working within censorship guidelines is that, like, whether intentionally, like, you know, trying to get past the system, or just unintentionally, like, what limitations you have, it can produce better results. Like, I'm glad that that outside limitation was there in this case, so that some shitty producer didn't get his way and ruin the ending of the movie.
I would have been fucking livid. I am not kidding. If this had ended pretty much any other way, it would have absolutely ruined the movie for me.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely would have been the thing, like, yeah, okay, like, this is what people would have wanted, like, you know, the guy's always got to get the girl, but that's not how we do things anymore.
It's also just, I don't even think even then would have been satisfying, honestly. Like, I can't imagine that you'd been like, woohoo, he's now an irredeemable shitlord who just took away this guy who is clearly the war hero of the movie and like won't let him have his wife back. Okay.
I will say this: never underestimate the power of shipping. I'm serious about that. Like, the protagonist link is a very strong force in people's minds. Like, it is kind of an ingrained trope that, like, if there is like someone like two people presented as like a main couple, like, we do like have this primal impulse to want to see them together. So even though rationally you're completely right, I would not be surprised if that is not the sort of thing that a lot of people took away from. They just be like, they smooched, which is like, I'm not here to like rag on people who have that gut reaction, but it is a gut reaction that a lot of people have.
I mean, honestly, fair. I don't know. Maybe I'm just cynical and old at 26, but I was not on that camp as soon as I found out she was married. I'm like, oh, that's less fun now. Like, I'm not even like a fucking stone cold, like, oh, listen, if that's how your relationship works, knock yourselves out. I'm not saying marriage is a complete sanctity thing going on. I don't know what the fucking, but like, when it's clearly cheating, that's where the line is. And that's where I'm like, this sucks. This is not fun in 2020, and as I said, that's why I'm really happy that that's not where the movie ended up.
Yeah, this is the way the movie needed to end, for sure.
It also it needs to end that way, not just for character beats, but also thematically, because let's talk about how Rick. Let's talk about Richard is clearly not an American stand-in. Oh my God! Hang on. Is there a tie-in here? Can we do a tie-in between this and Metal Wolf Chaos?
that might be. That was forever ago. That might be too deep a cut even for our audience.
All right, I'm gonna do it. Richard, what do you stand for? Decide here and now. And your options, dear audience, in this moment were, as Richard being America, 1, condemn Europe to concentration camps. 2, abscond with France, I guess, and leave the rest of Europe to concentration camps. Or step up and help.
sorry, just the image of America absconding with France with like a dagger between its teeth as it like cuts the chandelier. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, that's what it would do, kind of. I mean, that's...
You're not wrong.
So I mean, like, thematically, it has to end the way it did, because otherwise it would be just a nothing of a movie. The redemption arc would be for fucking nothing. It would thematically fall flat on its face, trying to swing away with France on the chandelier. Yeah, no, it's... this is how the movie had to end, and the fact that anyone had the goddamn idea to change it is insane.
What, chopping a cigar, like, what are you talking about? The lady's always gotta end up with the guy. Guys always get the lady. What are you talking about here?
Christ, that who the fuck? Thank God for the Hays Code.
Probably the only time that sentence has ever been uttered. Oh man. Oh well. I do have to. It isn't all like sunshine and rainbows. It isn't all like resonant themes and coherent character arcs. Unfortunately, I am gonna be that guy. I am going to poke a hole that'll deflate the ending a little bit. So if you don't want a beautiful, iconic ending ruined for you, mute for like the next couple of minutes, I guess.
Or like, you can also just pretend you never heard it, or pretend like, oh, it was an element of its time, and so we have to excuse it. Or you can do what I did and not put two and two together, because like the scenes that he's going to refer to are very separate from one another, and they feel like almost different characters.
Yeah, in other words, I'm about to drop a fresh hot dose of truth upon y'all. So, the character Louis, Louis is the start of a beautiful friendship. The cop, has a similar sort of like last minute redemption arc with Rick, which is satisfying in his own right when he like shoots the Nazi and like dedicates himself to returning France to its former glory of democracy and all that jazz. The problem is that although like what Rick's redemption is easier to get behind, because A, when he lashes out and acts like an asshole, he does it in very human ways that are very understandable. B, he's got some other redeeming qualities even before his like pre-redemption. And not that Louis isn't charming and witty in his own right either. Like, I quite liked him. Claude Rains is a good actor. But the problem is that there is a pretty prominent subplot where a young couple comes to Rick and they're like, hey, we want to escape and go to America like so many other people here. We don't have any money, but the main officer over there, your pal, has proposed that the wife make an alternate payment, shall we say.
In the era of Me Too, this is rough.
Yes. And it's played. I mean, it is played pretty much for laughs, and it's also implied that he does this quite often.
Yeah, it's not just implied; it's pretty much stated out.
It is pretty explicit, isn't it? So yeah. This is kind of like, on the one hand, like this is definitely a like. Not even like fair for its day thing, but more like people just did not care about these things as much, which is unfortunate. But this is kind of like if at the end Harvey Weinstein gets to walk into the sunset because he was kind of funny and witty throughout the film. If you do, it's not given a lot of focus, so it may, if you may be fortunate enough to not put two and two together, but if you do, it does put a damper on what is otherwise a marvelous ending.
Yeah, it was kind of supposed to be a redemption for the character in overcoming, his ambivalence in the political element, but it doesn't. That's not part of his sex pest element, and so like that kind of just looms as a specter. It doesn't feel like he's redeemed from that just from his working with Nazis. He has now seen the light. I don't expect him to stop trying to take advantage.
Right. This isn't like BoJack Horseman, where like part of that is reckoning with like the fact that he is kind of a predator and like thinking and like reckoning with how, if even ever, could he possibly like make up for some of the stuff that he's done. This is just redemption for a completely separate thing and then another skeezy thing, which is unfortunate. Mm-hmm. What a beautiful friendship indeed.
Do we have anything else we want to talk about with this movie?
I kind of feel bad for leaving it on such a downer.
Yeah. Just really quick. I really want to talk about the fucking kind of set design and also some of the early CG because I adored it. It was great. There's a scene where they're driving and the background crossfades from like a city to a forest, and it was cheesy and charming, and I absolutely loved it. I just wanted to mention that really quick, and just the sets were all absolutely wonderful to look at. And honestly, the way this whole thing is shot, I don't know whether it's just like the way the HD restoration helped or what, but like I genuinely felt like I was watching a movie that was made a year or two ago and just put in black and white, a la The Lighthouse or something like that.
Yeah, it's not dated in its shot construction in pretty much any way aside from some like driving shots.
I mean, even the driving shots felt more charming, and like this movie is
for sure
quick and witty in that way, and that like it wouldn't be surprising in like an Airplane style where they just stuck something like that in to be like a haha, look at this visual gag.
Yeah, I also, while we're praising the sets, I just gotta say I completely agree, and I've talked a lot about my pet peeves on this show, so now allow me to reveal. Oh God, I guess the only word I can think of is fetishes. One of my movie fetishes is when the entire is when the entire movie takes place, or basically takes place in one central, really memorable location, which of course this does with the nightclub, and I really like that. It's a really great set. And they do a lot with it. There's some really like dynamic visuals in it. I've been thinking about this a lot actually, because I've been I finally, this is completely unrelated, but I finally been watching Death Note like a good weeaboo. I was like the only like 13-year-old boy in 2007 who didn't watch Death Note. And I am struck by how entertaining that show is, despite the fact that half of it is just a kid talking to a ghoul in his room about stuff. And I love shit like that. I love when filmmakers, writers, directors get so much mileage out of not just like a city, like you know, that's kind of one location, but like a room even, and that's I guess this is a segment now. I guess Jackson's movie fetishes is gonna have to come back.
Here's the thing, though. This is our podcast. It doesn't have to. We have the ability to say no.
I'm giving in to my dark side, Sean. I'm giving in to the lore of memes.
As an aside, though, speaking of just Rick's bar and everything like that, there's one scene early on that like it has stuck with me a lot just because I really like the camera work on it. Where I believe it's the first time he's really talking to Renault when he has to go get 20,000 francs from his safe, and the camera pans from the bar into another room, and it kind of does like this motion that it pulls out and pulls back in, and it really feels like you're moving from room to room, even though it's very clearly like a continuation of the same set. And then it shifts, like they walk out and then like they actually do a cut to the actual room that they're in, and it's the same aesthetic, but it's definitely a different piece of the set. Like it's not the same spot that they were just in. And there's just something about that is incredibly memorable to me. It's so like heart of filmmaking that watching this movie from 1940s, I'm like, oh, this is really cool seeing it even way back then, something that is essentially a staple of all modern filmmaking. And I just really liked that. It was something that is very small and arguably unnoticeable, but stuck out to me in a very weird way. And I liked it a lot.
I mean, it always is kind of tickling to see, like, either an advanced technique or, like, a pretty stock technique, and realizing, like, oh, this is kind of ground zero for that, isn't it? There's always something fun about, like, reveling in history in that way. I don't know. Maybe that makes us nerds.
I mean, we've had a podcast for 150 some episodes or something like that we do basically because we want to. I think that makes us the nerds. This is just like backup evidence.
Maybe the real nerds were the episodes we made along the way.
They were Jackson. They were. You good?
I think we're good. That's a better place to end on.
Yeah, I was gonna say I like that high note where we can just kind of gush about it, because this is a very good movie. I recommend watching it, even if you listen to us discuss it. It's solid. It's a solid watch. Like the aesthetic alone is something that we cannot describe via an audio medium, and you just have to watch. Like it's a very aesthetic as fuck movie, and the fact that we haven't said that yet speaks to how much this movie has to offer, that we have discussed everything else and have left that alone.
Absolutely. If this is in your backlog and you've got time, and I know you've got time because you're trapped in your house.
Or you should be.
Karen. Yeah, give this one a watch. You will not be disappointed, I think.
As an aside, before we do wrap up here, because I'm just kind of slowly thinking of more things I want to talk about, because this movie is very good. When you were watching it, did you think a lot about what that bar must smell like?
I did not, actually.
I don't know. I think it's because like it was so smoky and like cigarettes and stuff. Like I just kept thinking, I'm like, I wonder what that smells like. And while I'm really happy that, you can't smoke in bars anymore, part of me does kind of wish I could have experienced that once.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that's the problem with smoking, is that it's bad, but like it's cool. Like
No. Don't say that. We can't say that. It's not cool. It's aesthetic in the 1940s sense.
It's aesthetic. Yeah, you're right. Cool is not the right word.
It's very much not cool. It's not even aesthetic anymore. Like, I think in modern movies, if someone's smoking, I don't think it has that same feel. But there is a swath of time where it was aesthetic, and I'm happy that we're past that.
Yeah. I think there's an argument to be made. I mean, it's a different kind of aesthetic, but I think in certain movies, in certain situations, like I think in like really grungy, like trashy sort of areas, it's got that kind of vibe. So you're right. It's not. Cool is not the word that I would use for the aesthetic that like modern smoking in movies brings up. But
yeah. Well, anyway, I'm Sean McKinda. I do not advocate for cigarettes in any way, shape, or form. Smoking is not cool, kids. Go look up more about that at your local library as well. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. Find my letterbox at Sean McKinda. I actually need to update that. I haven't done that in a little bit here. And find my writing over at 25yearslatersite.com.
I'm Jackson Keller. Apparently, I'm being paid by the tobacco industry to spread propaganda now.
Disney and the tobacco industry. And listen, I'm not getting any cutbacks here.
Well, the tobacco industry hates you for correcting the record on that one now. So
That's fair. I've been blacklisted, which honestly, I'm all right with.
I mean, I'll say this. One of us is going to hell, and it's probably the person who just said smoking is cool on air. But if you want to hear more of my dark words and deeds, you can find me over at twitch.tv/JacksonJKeller. If you're listening to my YouTube on YouTube, you know what happens there because you're hopefully subscribed. And if you're not, why the hell aren't you?
If you want to get in contact with the podcast, you can follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. We mostly tweet out like episode updates and stuff like that, so it's not super interesting, but hey, you might find something you like. If you want to yell at us directly for bad takes or Jackson's apparent kowtowing to the fucking cigarette industry.
I don't even smoke. I have no desire to smoke, and I still said that.
You can do so on our Discord. The best way to get access to that is by signing up at our Patreon. That's patreon.com/BADHcast. At only $1 a month, you get access to our Discord. At $5 a month, you get access to that and our backlog of bonus episodes. We've got a ton of them. We've got our Witch episode coming out tomorrow from when this goes live. It's a very interesting episode. I think we have a very interesting discussion about it. And at $10 a month, you get access to everything I've said before, and you can request episodes. So if you, like Julia, wanted to hear us talk about The Witcher or something like that, you can do so on that tier. You also get a little something.
Thank you so much, Julia, Travis, Pat, Aunt Summer, Mom. Don't worry, I don't smoke, I promise.
We'd also like to thank Loads the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can. I normally say see them live, but I don't think that's in the cards right now. So you should stream their music. You should buy their music wherever you can. Just support them in any way, shape, or form. They're wonderful people. Go do that. Also, thanks to 25yearslatersite.com. There's a little button of us in the corner of their website somewhere. You can go click on that, but you should also check out the website, see what people are writing about. There's all sorts of stuff going on over there, like movies, reviews, news, TV shows, all that good stuff, interviews, articles, all of it. They even just started their new website, Sports Obsessive, where they're talking about sports stuff. I'm probably not going to mention that one as much because it's Jackson and I, and the closest we get to sports is GDQ every year, and even that, you know.
The closest we get to sports is Blitzball and Final Fantasy X.
Oh, so yeah, go support them in any way you can. Next week, we're going to be talking about Citizen Kane. We're going to knock out the 2 big C's for quarantine classics.
Damn! Look at that alliteration.
Come back and check it out. Bye!
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go